The first time I realized something was seriously wrong with that lake. I was standing barefoot on my grandfather's dock holding a cold beer, watching a woman in all-white tennis clothes scream at a little boy for fishing too close to community property. The kid couldn't have been older than 10, and the crazy part was, she said it like she actually owned the water. Then she looked at me, pointed that perfectly manicured finger straight at my chest, and said, "You must be the new problem everybody warned me about." Now, if you've ever inherited something old enough to come with ghosts, grudges, and paperwork thicker than a Bible, then you already know how this story starts. My name's Nolan Mercer, and 6 months ago, I left behind a collapsing marriage, a burned-out architecture career in Denver, and pretty much every version of myself I didn't like anymore because my grandfather died and left me a lake nobody in town wanted me to truly understand. See, Gray Hollow wasn't the kind of place people accidentally moved to. Tiny Wisconsin lake town, population barely over 2,000, the kind of place where everybody knows who cheated on who in 1998 and still talks about it over pancakes at the diner. My grandfather, Walter Mercer, was basically local royalty there. People called him the keeper of Blackmere Lake, which sounded dramatic when I was a kid, but honestly, it fit. The man owned over 600 acres wrapped around the entire shoreline, and for 50 years he treated the place like it belonged to everybody. Free summer cookouts, fishing tournaments, boat rides for kids, Christmas charity drives out by the marina. Hell, he even let people use his land for weddings if they asked nicely. Nobody ever questioned him because Walter had that rare kind of quiet authority that didn't need explaining. Then he died, and suddenly everybody started acting real strange, especially Cynthia Voss. Lord, Cynthia, you ever meet somebody who smiles like they're already imagining your funeral? That was Cynthia, early 50s, rich divorcee from Naperville. Moved to Gray Hollow 3 years earlier and immediately decided she was the savior of civilization. Always dressed like she was heading to a yacht club nobody invited her to. Always carrying some clipboard or binder. Always talking about protecting community standards like she'd been elected queen of the shoreline. She introduced herself exactly 4 days after I arrived. I remember because I was still unpacking boxes when I heard heels clicking across the porch. Sharp little clicks, like warning shots. I opened the door, and there she stood wearing oversized sunglasses and this cream-colored tennis outfit that probably cost more than my first car. "Mr. Mercer," she said, looking past me into the house like she was inspecting a crime scene. "We need to discuss your grandfather's informal lake arrangements." Right away, something in my stomach tightened. Not fear exactly, more like instinct, like hearing a rattlesnake before you see it. I invited her inside anyway, because that's how my grandfather raised me. Big mistake. She sat at my kitchen table, opened a leather folder, and slid over a document thick enough to stop a bullet. "Blackmere Shores Community Waterfront Agreement," she announced proudly. 43 pages. $12,000 annually in maintenance obligations. Shared access compliance requirements. Noise regulations. Recreational usage restriction. It read like somebody binge-watched legal dramas while drinking box wine. "I'm sorry," I said, flipping through pages. "What exactly is this?" Cynthia folded her hands together and smiled. "Your grandfather verbally agreed to community shoreline governance years ago. We're simply formalizing things now that ownership transferred." Ownership transferred. Funny how she said that like I was some outsider squatting in my own family history. I leaned back in my chair and asked the obvious question. "And who exactly is we?" Her smile tightened just a little. "The Blackmere Lake Association." Never heard of it. Most people simply call it the HOA. There it was. The 3 letters every American secretly fears more than the IRS. I almost laughed, but Cynthia didn't look like somebody joking. She looked hungry. "Well," I told her carefully, "I haven't had time to review my grandfather's records yet, so I'm not signing anything today." The temperature in that room dropped 10 degrees. Cynthia slowly closed the folder, stood up, and gave me this cold little smile that somehow felt rehearsed. Your grandfather understood that cooperation keeps this community peaceful, she said softly. I'd hate for things to become unpleasant. And she walked out. And I swear to God, the second her BMW disappeared down the gravel drive, the whole property felt different, quieter, like the lake itself was waiting to see what I'd do next. At first, I tried ignoring her. I really did. I spent the next week cleaning the old boathouse, repairing dock boards, trying to remember what peace felt like. My grandfather's place still smelled like cedar wood, old coffee, lake water, and pipe tobacco, like childhood itself somehow got trapped in the walls. For the first time in years, I could breathe there. Then, Saturday happened. I invited a few old college friends over for burgers and beers. Nothing wild, just music playing low while we grilled near the water. Around sunset, I heard that same sharp clicking sound coming down the dock. Cynthia, holding laminated violation notices like she was serving federal warrants. This gathering exceeds approved occupancy limits, she announced loudly enough for everybody to hear. One of my friends actually laughed because he thought it was a joke. Cynthia didn't laugh back. Vehicles are improperly parked. Noise ordinances are being ignored. And guest lake access requires prior community approval. I could feel my face heating up while everybody awkwardly stared at me waiting for some explanation I didn't have. And standing there under those orange sunset skies, with my grandfather's lake behind me and this woman trying to police my own property, something finally clicked in my head. This wasn't about rules. It wasn't about community either. Cynthia wanted control, and somehow, she already thought she had it. The next morning, I started digging through my grandfather's study, mostly because I needed answers and partly because anger kept me awake half the night. Walter Mercer never struck me as the kind of man who'd hand control of his lake over to some self-appointed HOA queen in designer sunglasses. Nothing about it made sense. The study sat at the back of the house, overlooking the water. This dark little room lined floor to ceiling with bookshelves that smelled like old paper and dust baked by summer heat. I used to sit in there as a kid pretending to read while Grandpa handled paperwork at his desk. Back then it felt mysterious. Now it felt like a crime scene. Around noon, I found something strange behind one of the lower shelves. A hidden latch. Tiny brass thing tucked so carefully into the wood you'd never notice unless you knew exactly where to press. When the panel clicked open, I actually froze for a second because suddenly I realized maybe my grandfather had been hiding things for a reason. Inside sat an old cedar box full of rolled maps, yellow deeds, county records, and one thick leather binder labeled water rights and conservation trust documents. I remember laughing quietly to myself right there on the floor because Cynthia had spent 2 weeks acting like she held all the cards. Meanwhile, my grandfather apparently left behind enough paperwork to start a small war. The deeper I read, the crazier it got. Blackmere Lake wasn't community property. Not even close. Walter Mercer had legally purchased every inch of shoreline access over 40 years through a series of negotiated land acquisitions. Some owners sold willingly, some traded access easements, some donated sections for tax breaks. But by 1997, the Mercer estate controlled nearly the entire lake perimeter outright. Not shared, not implied, owned, completely. My stomach actually flipped reading the county seal stamped across those surveys because suddenly every conversation with Cynthia replayed in my head differently. She wasn't confused. She knew. That woman absolutely knew she had no legal authority over that lake, which raised a much uglier question. If she knew she didn't own it, why was she charging people thousands of dollars for access? That answer came quicker than I expected. I started talking to neighbors. Quietly at first. Most folks around Blackmere kept to themselves, but once you mentioned Walter Mercer's name, walls came down fast. Mrs. Delaney from 2 houses over invited me in for coffee and nearly choked when I asked about HOA dues. Honey, we've been paying Cynthia almost $300 a month for lake preservation fees. she whispered like admitting a crime. She said your grandfather approved it before he passed. $300. Monthly. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. Then came the real gut punch. An older guy named Harold Baines told me Cynthia collected special shoreline assessments too. Extra charges for dock usage, fishing permits, even kayak access. Families around that lake have been paying her for years because she convinced everybody the Mercer property was transitioning into community management after my grandfather's health declined. She built the whole scam around his death before the man was even buried. That's the part that really got under my skin. Not the money, not even the lies. It was the disrespect. Walter Mercer spent his entire life making sure that Lake brought people together, and Cynthia somehow turned it into a business model. By Tuesday, I drove into county records myself because I wanted confirmation straight from the source. The clerk at the courthouse, an older woman named Teresa, who clearly lived for small-town drama, practically lit up when I mentioned Cynthia's HOA. That woman finally getting investigated? She muttered before disappearing into the back room. 10 minutes later, she returned carrying a stack of filings thick enough to build a campfire. No register HOA. No incorporated lake authority. No municipal lake district. Nothing. Legally speaking, Cynthia Voss had about as much jurisdiction over Blackmere Lake as a cashier target. But buried deeper in those records, that's where things got dangerous. Cynthia had submitted preliminary development inquiries with the county planning office. Boat rental permits, shoreline expansion concepts, parking lot feasibility studies. She'd even proposed seasonal cabin construction around the north side of the lake. My grandfather's property. I sat there staring at those forms while this cold pressure slowly spread through my chest because suddenly the whole thing became clear. Cynthia wasn't trying to manage the lake. She was trying to take it over before anybody realized she had no right to touch it. And the worst part? Some people in town actually supported her. Newer residents especially. Folks who moved there after Walter got sick. Cynthia fed them this story about modernizing Blackmere, turning it into a tourism destination with improved amenities, better recreational opportunities, stronger property values. She wrapped greed in community language so well people didn't even realize they were being manipulated. That Thursday, she held a public meeting at the town hall. Funny thing is, nobody invited me, which immediately made me decide I was absolutely going. The place was packed when I walked in. Folding chairs full of nervous homeowners. Cheap coffee brewing near the back wall. Cynthia standing at a projector screen dressed like a suburban dictator. The second she saw me enter, her entire expression twitched. Just for a second, but I caught it. Fear. Tiny little flicker. As I was explaining, she continued carefully. Blackmere requires structured oversight to protect community access moving forward. Then she clicked to a slide showing overcrowded beaches, damaged docks, littered shoreline photos, half of which I recognized from completely different lakes because she'd literally pulled them off Google. I almost admired the audacity. Almost. 20 minutes into her presentation, she started talking about proposed mandatory access fees and future shoreline restructuring plans. That's when I stood up. Question, I said calmly. The whole room went quiet. Cynthia's jaw tightened immediately. What legal authority gives you the right to restructure private property? You could actually hear chairs creak. Nobody moved. Cynthia smiled, that same poisonous little smile I'd already learned to hate. Community stewardship discussions are ongoing, she answered smoothly. That's not what I asked. I pulled a folder from under my arm and held up copies of the original county surveys. Because according to these records, Blackmere Lake belongs to the Mercer estate outright. No shared ownership. No HOA authority. No transfer agreements. Murmurs exploded instantly across the room. Cynthia's face drained so fast, it honestly startled me. Those documents are outdated, she snapped. Actually, I replied, they were recertified 8 months ago. Somebody near the back whispered, wait, what? Then another voice cut in. Hold on. Cynthia said the lake was transitioning to community ownership. A third voice. We paid $12,000 last year for shoreline preservation. And there it was, the moment the spell cracked. Cynthia tried regaining control fast. Real fast. Mr. Mercer is misunderstanding decades of verbal agreements, she announced loudly, talking over the crowd now. Walter Mercer supported shared community management. Shared access. I corrected her. Not ownership. Her eyes locked on mine then. And for the first time, the fake politeness disappeared completely. Pure atred. Cold and sharp. You have no idea how much this town sacrificed for that lake, she hissed quietly enough only I could hear. You think inheriting land makes you important? I leaned closer. No, I said softly. But forging authority over property you don't own probably makes you criminal. Jesus, the silence after that felt radioactive. Cynthia grabbed her papers so aggressively the microphone screeched with feedback. Then she stormed out while half the room erupted into arguments behind her. Some people angry at her. Some angry at me. Some just confused because they'd spent years paying money into something that apparently never existed legally at all. I should have felt victorious walking out of that meeting. Instead, I felt uneasy because people like Cynthia don't walk away quietly after public humiliation. And sure enough, things got ugly fast. The very next morning, I woke up to fake no trespassing signs hammered around sections of my shoreline. Signs with forged county logos printed across the bottom. Somebody spray-painted private water enforcement zone across my boat ramp in bright red paint. By afternoon, social media exploded with posts calling me a greedy outsider trying to steal community traditions. Cynthia was everywhere online. Facebook groups, neighborhood forums, even local news comment sections, spinning this narrative that I planned to fence off the lake and charge admission fees like some kind of amusement park owner. Then came the moment that honestly broke my heart a little. I was grabbing groceries when a little girl tugged my sleeve near the frozen food aisle. Maybe 9 years old. Mr. Mercer, she asked quietly, my mom said you might stop us from swimming. Is that true? Mun. I can still hear that kid's voice sometimes. That's when I realized Cynthia wasn't just lying anymore. She was weaponizing fear. And the scary part? It was working that weekend. I finally understood something my grandfather used to say all the time when I was younger. People don't fight hardest over what they need. Nolan, they fight hardest over what they think they deserve. At the time, I thought it was just old man wisdom. Turns out, he was warning me. Friday night, I sat alone on the dock long after sunset, listening to water slap against the pilings while those fake signs still stood scattered around the shoreline like little red flags of stupidity. I kept thinking about that little girl in the grocery store, about the way fear spreads through communities faster than truth ever does. Cynthia understood that. She understood people better than I wanted to admit. She knew how to turn uncertainty into loyalty, how to make herself look like the protector while painting me as the threat. And honestly, for a couple days, I almost let her win. Then I opened my grandfather's final journal. I found it by accident inside the cedar box beneath the property records. Old black notebook, worn leather cover, pages smelling faintly like pipe smoke and lake water. Most of it was conservation notes, fishing records, weather observations. Grandpa writing about Blackmere like the lake itself was family. But near the end, tucked between pages about shoreline erosion and trout populations, I found a section labeled, "If somebody ever tries to, take the lake." I swear my hands actually shook reading that sentence. Walter wrote about developers approaching him years earlier, offering money for resort construction. He wrote about local politicians pressuring him to modernize the shoreline. And then one line hit me so hard I had to put the journal down for a minute. The danger won't come from strangers, Nolan. It'll come from people who smile while they convince others greed is community service. Jesus. It was like the old man saw Cynthia coming 20 years early. That notebook also contained something even more important: trust documents. Blackmere Lake had been quietly placed under federal conservation protection almost a decade earlier because of rare freshwater habitats connected to the northern wetlands. My grandfather created a private environmental trust tied directly to the property, and when he died, stewardship transferred to me automatically, which meant Cynthia's little development plans. Illegal as hell. Federal level illegal. Boat rental expansion, parking lots, shoreline cabins. Every single proposal violated protected conservation restrictions. Suddenly everything changed. I wasn't just defending inherited land anymore. I was protecting federally preserved watershed property from fraudulent development schemes. And once my lawyer, Rebecca Hale, saw the paperwork, oh man. Rebecca didn't smile often, but when she finished reading those trust records, she leaned back in her chair and actually laughed. "Nolan," she said, "this woman accidentally committed fraud against protected federal land." Turns out Cynthia's fake HOA fees crossed state lines through electronic transfers. Some homeowners paid remotely from Illinois and Minnesota vacation properties. Rightful, federal jurisdiction. Then there were the forged county notices, false development applications, unauthorized collection of property management funds. Rebecca started listing potential charges, and honestly, it stopped sounding like neighborhood drama and started sounding like the opening scene of a Netflix documentary. But the part that satisfied me most wasn't revenge. It was what came next. Instead of shutting the community out, I decided to do the exact opposite. 2 weeks later, we announced the first annual Blackmere Conservation Festival. Free fishing clinics for kids, kayak tour, food trucks from local businesses, live music by the marina, wildlife education booths. My grandfather's old dream projects finally funded through the Conservation Trust exactly how he intended. Cynthia lost her damn mind. She posted online for days, claiming the festival was an illegal publicity stunt. Said I was manipulating the town. Said federal protections were fabricated. Then, she made the mistake that finally buried her. She showed up. July 4th morning arrived hot and bright, the kind of summer day where the lake looks almost fake under the sunlight. Families packed the shoreline by noon. Kids running around with popsicles melting down their wrists. Country music drifting across the docks. Old fishermen telling stories under white tents. Honestly, for the first time since Grandpa died, Blackmere felt alive again. Around 2 in the afternoon, I saw Cynthia marching down toward the marina in this blinding white pantsuit with 2 remaining supporters trailing behind her like nervous interns. People literally stopped talking as she approached. "This event is unauthorized," she announced loudly, holding up some laminated badge nobody recognized. "As acting president of the Blackmere Waterfront Association, I'm ordering immediate shutdown of all recreational activity." Rebecca looked at me and quietly whispered, "Here we go." Cynthia started demanding permits, insurance papers, ownership records, and that's when Deputy Collins stepped forward beside the pavilion. "Actually, ma'am," he said calmly, "before we discuss permits, federal investigators would like a word with you." I'll never forget her face. Ever. It wasn't anger at first. It was confusion. Pure confusion. Like her brain genuinely couldn't process consequences finally catching up to her. Then 2 federal agents approached from behind the crowd, holding a folder thick with documents. One of them asked her full name. The other started reading charges. Rightful, forgery, fraudulent misrepresentation of property authority, obstruction related to protected conservation land investigations. Around us, 200 people stood completely silent, except for waves hitting the docks behind them. Cynthia kept shaking her head, whispering, "This is insane. This is insane," while cameras came out all across the festival grounds. And right before they placed her in handcuffs, she looked directly at me. I expected rage. Instead, she looked embarrassed. Small somehow, like the version of herself she invented for everybody finally cracked apart in public. The strange thing is, I didn't feel triumphant. Not really. Mostly I just felt tired. Tired of fear. Tired of power games. Tired of watching communities tear themselves apart because one manipulative person figured out how to weaponize insecurity. After Cynthia was taken away, nobody spoke for a few seconds. Then somewhere near the back, a little kid yelled, "Are the boat rides still happening?" And the whole crowd burst out laughing. Honest to God, laughing. The tension broke instantly after that. Music started back up. Families relaxed again. Sunset rolled across Black Mirror Lake while fireworks reflected off the water, and people stayed out on those docks until almost midnight. Later that night, I sat alone near the marina cleaning up empty soda cans when Harold Baines walked over carrying 2 beers. He handed me one, stared out across the lake a while, then quietly said, "Your grandfather would have liked how you handled this." That one almost got me, because the truth is, part of me still wonders if I handled it right. Cynthia absolutely committed fraud. No question. But some people in town still think I destroyed her life instead of protecting the lake. Others think she genuinely believed she was helping the community in her own twisted way. Maybe power just poisoned her slowly over time. I don't know. What I do know is this: communities get dangerous when people stop verifying the truth for themselves. And fear makes folks hand authority to the loudest person in the room way too easily. So now I want to ask you something. If somebody like Cynthia showed up in your neighborhood claiming they were protecting the community, how long do you think it would take before people started believing them? And more importantly, would you have fought back the way I did, or would you have just walked away from the whole mess? Let me know down in the comments, because honestly, I still don't know if Black Mirror Lake changed my life for better or worse.